Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Mental Health Academy MHA School's Masterclass on Neurodiversity Fundamentals for Teachers. My name is Pedro Gondim. I'm Mental Health Academy CEO and your host for this series. And joining me in this masterclass is Elaine Taylor-Klaus. Elaine, how are you today?
I'm doing fabulous. Great to be here.
Wonderful to connect with you again, and it's time to provide some very, very important insights for teachers all over the place, Australia, United States, and more. Now, Elaine, for those of you that don't know much about your work, let me take this opportunity to introduce you to our attendees or the people that are watching this on demand later on. So Elaine Taylor-Klaus is a globally recognized thought leader, master certified coach, and a pioneer at the intersection of neurodiversity, coaching, and parenting. Co-founder of ImpactParents.com and Impact ADHD, the first global coaching organization dedicated to empowering parents and professionals who support neurodiverse children and young adults, Elaine combines deep personal experience with professional expertise to guide families through the complexities of ADHD, anxiety, and other neurodiversity-related challenges. As a mother of 6, including children with ADHD, Elaine brings both lived experience and a neurodiversity-informed coach approach to her work. She's the co-host of the Parenting with Impact podcast and author of acclaimed books such as Parenting ADHD Now, Easy Intervention Strategies to Empower Kids with ADHD, and The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids with ADHD, Anxiety, and more. Her innovative programs such as Sanity School have helped thousands of families worldwide navigate the challenges of raising neurodiverse kids with greater confidence, clarity, and resilience. And we're going to include links to all of these, Elaine's website, books, and everything on the handout for this masterclass. So don't worry about having to write it all down. Elaine, anything else you'd like to add?
No, only that somehow they got tweezed. I do not have 6 children. I have three children and a daughter-in-law.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's helpful. That's good.
Otherwise, it's
One of
all
our
good.
other one of our other presenters, Justin Colson, does have 6 children, and there's 6 girls, and he's still sane. So that's good. He's actually on next month's masterclass, so we're gonna correct that in the website. All right, Elaine, I'm just gonna quickly go through our housekeeping items now, particularly relevant for those that have not attended webinars with MHA before. So first thing you notice is you cannot talk during the session, but you can use the chat and Q&A tabs to interact with other peers and our team during the presentation and ask questions. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A segment, and we're gonna be able to cover all the questions to submit and more. Secondly, this session is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be available via the event portal shortly after the conclusion of the live webinar, along with the presentation slides and a handout. So just remember to go back to your event portal and refresh the page if you can't see that. And the same applies to accessing a certificate, CPD, CPD, depending on your region. Just look for the certificate button, which will appear after the live session has ended. Now, we are going to launch the slides, Elaine, and start the presentation. I'm going to go in the background now for our Q&A segment. And Joy, and I'm looking forward to coming back here.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be back at MHA and excited to be here with you guys for the next little while. Let me start by saying I have a lot of content, but I'm also a very informal presenter. So I will interact with you in the chat if you have questions as we're going. We will have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, but if you have questions throughout or you want to clarify something I'm speaking to, definitely please capture it in the chat because I do like to interact with the chat while I'm speaking. It makes me feel like I'm in a live audience. I think that's all I want to say in the way of introduction. Again, thank you all for being here. I know time is valuable for everybody, so I really appreciate it and honored by your taking the time to tune into this conversation. I think it's a really important conversation, talking about neurodiversity fundamentals. I have come to see neurodiversity and neuro-informed education as an ethical imperative for helping professionals of all kinds, doctors, therapists, teachers, coaches. I am coming to realize that with a significant percentage of the population representing all kinds of neurodiversity, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's really important for all of us to understand what that means so that we can support everybody comprehensively. So what we're going to talk about today is some fundamentals of neurodiversity, identifying and addressing neurodivergence as distinct from neurodiversity, why I believe that neuro-informed education is so important, and some contexts for you, 5 contexts for you to understand what would be required of you to learn in order to have a neuro-informed awareness for your education. I am not going to be able to teach everything that you would need to know in the next hour and a half, but I am going to tell you what those pieces are, so that if you do decide that this is important for you, if you do want to become more neuro-informed as an educator, you'll know where to begin to look for further education. We're going to talk a little bit about accommodations and appropriate referrals and how to tailor support based on people with neurodiversity. And then we're going to have plenty of time for engaging in Q&A at the end. So again, this is not a session designed to teach you how to be a neuro-informed educator, but to understand what is it, what's important about it, and what are the components that would be included. We're going to cover some of it here today, but by no means will it be comprehensive. So let's start with, how do you define neurodiversity and neurodivergence? And please capture in the chat if there's a definition that you work with, that you come from, that makes sense to you. What is this word that's coming up in the world so much these days, neurodiversity? What is neurodivergence? What do you know about it? What's your experience with it? Capture it in the chat. Write it down for yourself. The way I like to talk about neurodiversity is that the brain does not discriminate. The neurodiversity was actually termed by a graduate student, I believe, in Australia. And it captures the notion that variations in human brain function are normal. They're not deficits. And this term was coined to promote equality and inclusion of what was then called neurological minorities. This is in the early years of the autism awareness. Now it is a more pervasive term that's used to describe a much wider range of differences in brain. We like to call it brain wiring, but differences in the way the brain functions, operates, processes information. Neurodiversity is observable in all aspects of life. So it's not like it's something that shows up at work but not at home, or at school but not at home. It shows up and influences people in social, learning, attention, mood. Any kind of self-directed regulation and action is going to be impacted if somebody is somebody with neurodiversity. And it is also present in all racial, ethnic, gender, and religious or socioeconomic groups. So it really doesn't discriminate. Yes, thank you, Lana. It was Judy Singer who had originally coined the term I believe it was in her PhD thesis. And it has caught on because it's so spot on, if you think about it. The brain does not discriminate. We all have different aspects in the way our brains function that have strengths and challenges. Neurodivergence is the idea that some individuals have a brain or a mind that diverges from what is typical or neuronormative. And I want to speak to this a little bit, because what I've learned over the years, I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. And for many, many years, I shied away from using the term neurodivergence, because I think it is a pejorative term. It's got negative connotations to it. It's got a deficit focus. And I don't think it's particularly helpful for people who are learning to use their brain in a way that works for them. In recent years, with the rise of awareness around neurodiversity and neurodivergence, I'm beginning to use the term more because I think it shows the distinction. And we'll talk about it in a few minutes. And I'll show you some of the numbers around it. But the truth is that neurodivergence, that is this different brain wiring from neuronormative or neurotypical, which is where most brain science has been focused, can be either acquired or genetic. And it's not intrinsically positive or negative. It's not bad or good. It's not desirable or undesirable. It's just different. But when someone's brain is wired in a way that makes it difficult for them to function within the normal structures of society that were typically designed for neurotypical or neuronormative brains, it can be very difficult for them to function effectively at the best of their capacity. And that's when it becomes known as a divergence. So let's look at the numbers. There are a lot of different ways you can look at neurodiversity. And again, I'm going to cover that in a little more detail in a moment. But about 2 out of 5 adults showed symptoms of anxiety or depression in 2021. That was during the pandemic. So that means about 40% of the population was experiencing some symptoms of anxiety, which rewires the circuitry of the brain. It's a difference in brain wiring. About 20% of students, and that's a conservative number, are thought to have learning or attention issues. Somewhere between 30 and 40% of the population are thought to be neurodivergent. The remaining majority are neurotypical. That's from the ADHD Aware. National Center for Disease Control estimates that about 1 in 36 8-year-olds are diagnosed with autism. Over 2% of adults are diagnosed with autism. So the numbers are variable. But when we look at all of the pieces and all of the aspects that can go to describe someone as neurodiverse, what we find out is that the numbers are significantly higher than we might have expected. These stats, Mandy, are from all over the country, all over the world. So some of them are from the UK, some of them are from the US. The differences in brain wiring can be either intrinsic or acquired. And I think this is a really important piece, because if we just look at the intrinsic, we're looking at a significant population. If 20% of kids are thought to have learning disabilities, if at least 10 to 15% of kids probably are thought to have ADHD. If we look at the genetic brain-based conditions, ADHD, anxiety, autism, depression, we're probably looking at 30 to 40% of the population. If you add in giftedness to that, then also a brain-based difference, that's going to bump up the number even further. Then when you look at language, language processing, dyslexia, sensory sensitivities, all of those are going to bump that number up. Then when we look at the acquired trauma, PTSD, brain injury, side effects of medications and different diseases, hormonal changes, all of that, not to mention volatile VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, and the stress that creates. What we begin to realize is that neurodiversity is showing up in probably upwards of 40% of the population. So all of us who are educating, teaching, counseling, whatever work you're doing in the world, you are encountering people every day with neurodiversity, whether you're aware of it or not, and whether they are aware of it or not, right? And that, I think that's the big piece, is because a lot of people with neurodiversity are not aware of it themselves. Particularly, we're seeing more and more adults becoming diagnosed with various conditions because their kids are being diagnosed, but they weren't at the time that they were children. It's not because it's happening more often necessarily. It's because we understand it better. We're able to recognize it better. We have higher screening mechanisms for it. And as a result, we're able to recognize a wider range of challenges that people are dealing with than we ever understood before. So neurodiversity can manifest in positive and challenging ways. It can be a gift. Out-of-the-box thinking, processing style differences, empathy, creativity, resilience. I heard somebody describe in a presentation the other day, was talking about the ability to make connections and to puzzle information together and to link information. There's lots of different ways that some people with neurodiversity have extraordinary gifts and challenges that come with it. It can also manifest in challenges, disorganization, impulsivity, challenges with all kinds of executive function, working memory, attention, managing emotions is a huge effort for a lot of people who struggle with neurodiversity. Physical self-regulation, inhibiting action, sensory issues. So it can be a positive and a negative, and for most people, it's both. Right? Every gift overapplied can become a deficit or a liability. Every tool overapplied can become a challenge. So these gifts can be really extraordinary for some of our kids or from the people we work with, but they also come with challenges. And we want to recognize that those challenges are real and begin to learn to meet them where they are and help support them in those challenges. So if we kind of bottom line neurodiversity, what we can say is that underlying neurodiversity are very often these contradictory challenges with self-regulation. So on the one hand, we've got kids who may be very articulate, very bright. Maybe you've got a twice exceptional kid who is reading at an advanced level, has a vocabulary at an advanced level, but may still be struggling with executive function challenges and organizing a backpack and turning in papers. So we have this disparity between what their gifts are and how they see the world and the challenges that come with them. And so when we look at these disparities, at these different ways that it shows up, neurodiversity tends to impact three different areas. First, it impacts feelings. So it really speaks to our self-concept. Oftentimes, people with neurodiversity deal with deeper issues of shame, saboteurs, limiting beliefs, diminished self-esteem. So when we're talking about adults with neurodiversity, very often they've spent an entire lifetime either not knowing or kind of being corrected and redirected most of their lives. And so they often come to adulthood with a deep, what we might call a shame spiral, with difficulty managing their self-esteem. This is also true for children who have been directed and redirected and corrected so often, at some point they stop wanting to be wrong. And that can turn into defensiveness, masking, magical thinking, inflated sense of self-concept, this notion that I can do it. I just have to try harder and I can do it. So these are kind of two sides of the same coin, but these emotional reactions are very common in people who are struggling with neurodiversity and who the way I like to say it is, if you can't get yourself to do what the world expects you to do, at some point that's going to make you anxious or depressed or upset or self-doubt. It really contributes to an emotional challenge with sense of self. And you can summarize these feelings with this wonderful term, SOTA. The behaviors that come about as a result of these feelings is either shutting down, going on the offensive, going on the defensive, or avoiding altogether. And I'm sure all of you see these behaviors in a school environment on a regular basis. Sometimes we interpret these behaviors as rude, disrespectful, unmotivated, but very often they're coming from an underlying sense of helplessness or hopelessness or feeling unable or incompetent in some way. So the second category that neurodiversity impacts is performance. This is the classics. This is organizing of the self. So the ability to, and we're going to talk about executive function in a little while, but the ability to organize our capacity to do what's expected of us. So first we were talking about how we feel about it. Now we're talking about what do we actually do? And this can show up in contradictory ways. So on the one hand, it can show up as work avoidance, or maybe a perfectionism that prevents a child or somebody from really completing the work, continuing to rip up the assignment or start and stop and start and stop and never get through. It can look a lot like procrastination or low energy, or sometimes it can look really unengaged or unmotivated. The flip side of that is that neurodiversity can also show up as a kind of workaholism, overcommitted, trying too hard, staying up too late, not really being good enough at time and task management. So just giving it as much time as it can possibly take to get it all done. And this might be very high energy. So you notice, again, we're looking at the contradictions. One of the complicating factors in neurodiversity is that it can look so different. And so it's hard to tag it if you have like 5 kids in a classroom with all different aspects of neurodiversity. You really have to meet each of those needs differently. And that's not going to be, you can't bottom line it or bottle it up in a very simple solution. So we've talked about feelings, we've talked about performance. The third category of contradiction is that neurodiversity impacts relationships, all kinds of emotion and human dynamics. So on the one side, again, anger, emotional reactivity, highly sensitive people, a lot of creation of conflict. Sometimes it's socially awkward. Russell Barkley used to say that an adult with ADHD was at higher risk of losing their job, not from not turning in a report or poor work performance, but from emotional reactivity in the workplace and not being able to manage their emotional self, their emotional capacity. The flip side, of course, is impulsivity, trouble with follow through, obsessive thinking, not creating conflict, but avoiding conflict. Both of these can be aspects of neurodiversity. So as you see, neurodiversity impacts both being and doing. All aspects of who we are, what we do, and how we feel can be impacted for somebody with neurodiversity. As educators, what makes this so important is this beautiful old saying that you've all heard, I think misattributed to Albert Einstein. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. This is a really important piece for us and for educators to understand around children with neurodiversity and around our colleagues with neurodiversity, is that if we're evaluating them and holding them to a standard based on a particular neurotypical way that most people's brains work, and we're not taking into account what's happening in their brain, we're not setting them up for success. And in fact, we're actively setting them up for failure. So without acknowledging that there is a reason for the challenges they're facing, there is a reason for what they're struggling with. What we've seen in our work with parents and with educators and with therapists and with doctors is that when we don't give kids an explanation for what they're struggling with, what they make up is a whole lot worse. And what they make up is they're lazy, crazy, or stupid. And so we hear parents come to us all the time saying, but I don't want to give my kid a label, but I don't want to give them an excuse. And what we've seen is that the kids already know if they're struggling. It's whether we acknowledge what's happening for them or not that changes their ability to stand up to it and learn to manage it, or the tendency to avoid or fight or manage it in an unconstructive, non-constructive way. So our kids will make up that they're lazy, crazy, or stupid. And they will begin to mask. Masking is the term you probably heard. It's a lot more common than it was. Acting neurotypically to avoid negativity. It was initially, again, came out of the autism realm and is being used in all aspects of neurodiversity now because it can lead to anxiety and depression and burnout, shutdown and overwhelm. And all of those things make a kid unavailable for learning. So we really need to recognize that if we're not meeting them where they are, if we're not understanding that there is a neurological underpinning and reason for the ways that they're struggling, if we're not helping them find the explanation for what they're struggling with, what they're going to make up about themselves is going to contribute to a negative self-concept, and they're going to burn themselves out at some point from that tendency to try harder and look like they've got it all together. And somebody's asking Joan about when they start using the label as an excuse. I'm going to ask you to pin that question and bring it back to me later in the conversation, because it's not that it's not important, but I want to set the stage first, because if a kid's using it as an excuse, that means it hasn't been explained yet well enough. And if we as adults learn how to hold accountability in a constructive and productive way, then we guide kids to use it as an explanation, not an excuse. If they're using it as an excuse, it's because they haven't been taught another way. Bottom line is that when supports are not neuro-informed, it's going to have a negative impact on our students and on their capacity to reach their full potential, on their capacity to follow through and produce and demonstrate their knowledge and their capacity for learning. And it has the risk of leading to exhaustion, burnout, and poor mental health consequences. So what happens in a school environment? Well, when neurodiversity is not understood, when it's not identified, as educators, it can lead us to make assumptions about kids' behaviors, motivation, their commitment, their reactivity. So whether a kid's struggling with lack of follow through or motivation or lateness or missing appointments or rudeness or indecision, all of these reactions, if there's an underlying neurodiversity that's leading to it, can lead us to make assumptions about what is really happening with them that may not be true. A lot of our kids, what we've learned with neurodiversity is our kids are actually not trying, but they're actually trying harder than most of their peers. And we're not giving them the recognition for the effort that they're putting in. So we run the risk of making assumptions. And we miss the opportunity to communicate effectively with them, to provide appropriate support based on what their needs are, and to really partner with them and collaborate with them and with other helping professionals to set them up for success and create an environment that really works for them. If we as providers, as educators and parents, move too quickly to problem solving, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. If we move too quickly to problem solving, we're actually preventing kids from understanding themselves well enough to begin to learn to manage themselves. And in a school environment, we tend to spend a lot of time as the adults in a school environment in what we like to call a director mode. We are telling them what to do, why to do it, what's important about it. And kids with neurodiversity very often really benefit when we collaborate with them, when they are part of the process of problem solving, part of the process of decision making. And that gives them a capacity to get buy-in and ownership in a different way, which is what their brains need to be able to engage differently. Our kids, we often say, don't have a just get it done button. We're going to talk about that again in a minute. So I want to take a minute before I keep going, and I will continue, but capture for yourself or in the chat. I want you to just identify what you're taking away in terms of the risks of unidentified neurodiversity in education. What's the risk wherever you're coming from, whether you're in a primary school or older grades? What are you aware of that are potential risks of unidentified neurodiversity in education? Capture it for yourself or capture it in the chat. So what I'm going to move into next is the 5 key challenge areas that we've identified as the 5 core competencies that are required for people to really understand neurodiversity and be able to effectively provide supports for people with neurodiversity. This is the very minimum. There are other things I would add to this list. Being trauma informed is something that I would add to this list. But if you were to come to me and say, what is the absolute basics? What are the fundamentals that we need to be a neuro-informed educator? These would be the 5 areas that we would focus on. At the top is emotional awareness and regulation. It is so core to every aspect of everything else. And we tend to assume that they just need to manage their emotions. But what we're learning now is that until they manage their emotions, they're very often not available for everything else. So at the very top of the pyramid is emotional awareness and regulation. Then comes executive function, processing differences. We'll have a deeper conversation about motivation and intention. And at the very bottom is the effective use of systems and structures. Very, very often we start with systems and structures, when in fact with these kids, what we need to do is end with systems and structures. So I want to check in for a minute because I see some comments in the chat, and I just want to capture some of what you're saying as I went back to that conversation about what are the potential risks of unidentified neurodiversity in education. What I'm hearing some of you saying is that our students in our care are developing a story about themselves that is negative and potentially harmful. A lot of issues with concept of self, too much focus on behaviors and consequences, and not enough on what underpins the behaviors. Beautiful awareness. Karen's saying so many can lead to depression and the consequences of that on top of many others. And then David is arguing that a large system, even just a standard classroom, can't cater for such a wide range of needs. And I'm going to challenge it a little bit, David, with your permission, that in fact, this is, if you think about the concept of universal design, that one of the beauties of neuroawareness is that if we begin to recognize that everybody's brain is wired differently, we can actually create systems that work for the whole and tailor to the individual at the same time. And in that moment, all boats will rise. We're actually, when we've trained a number of educators in the coach approach that we use, in the neuro-informed coach approach. One of them immediately became teacher of the year in her school. And what she said is that by learning to meet the needs of the kids with neurodiversity, she learned to meet the needs of all of her kids in the classroom in a different way. And that allowed her to create an environment where everyone in the classroom got their needs met. And so there is an opportunity to do that with some very minor tweaks and changes. We're not talking about major overhauls. It's really more of a perspective shift and a mindset shift than it is too much that has to do with doing so much so differently. So I'm going to introduce you to these 5 categories because I think at the very surface, I can't go through all the detail. Each of these would be an hour presentation. But if you understand the frameworks, it'll begin to help you identify areas for continuing education if that's something you want to pursue. So the first one, as I mentioned, is emotional regulation. In this framework, if we consider the bottom area here is aware, most of us function in the world, we're walking through the world in a general sense of openness and awareness. We're operating from the frontal lobe of our brain. We're in a state of calm. We're available for learning. We are available for problem solving. As soon as we get irritated, our brain moves into the limbic system, and now we're on alert. So irritation is when there is a gap between an expectation and the reality. And this can happen when a teacher in a classroom when a kid expects that we'll be doing math next and something changes in the schedule and now we're doing language arts next. Or it could happen when a kid is thinking that they're going at home with somebody for a play date and the kid doesn't show up to school that day because they're sick. So that irritation, that expectation gap, when somebody is irritated, disappointed, surprised, when things don't go as they expect it to, that creates an agitation, and that raises somebody's nervous system to alert. At that point, they tell themselves a story. And the story could be, well, it's okay, I've got other friends. Or the story could be, oh my gosh, nobody likes me, I have no friends. The story that kid tells themselves or that they hear from the adults around them is going to make the difference between whether they are able to reclaim their brain and move themselves back down into a problem-solving place, or whether their brain's going to continue to escalate and get agitated and move all the way up to an alarm state where they are completely, at that point, unavailable for problem solving. So this is a much more complex topic than we can cover here. But what I want to present is this notion that how a kid is feeling and thinking about how they're feeling is going to determine their brain's capacity to reason and analyze and work or not. If a kid is not fully in this aware state, they're going to be less available for learning. And so we as the adults need to recognize when a kid's getting triggered, that is not the time to keep pushing through, but to help them reclaim the brain and down-regulate so that we can get them back into an awareness state where they will be available for learning. So the coaching tip that we would offer here is to recognize that flooding or overwhelm can really impact task initiation, performance, and completion. So we really, as the adults in their lives, want to avoid problem solving whenever we notice that a student's brain is triggered in any way. And it doesn't have to be a full-blown alarm to recognize that if they're on alert, if they've had a rough morning, if they just had a fight with their parent before they got out of the car, they may need some help to downregulate before they're going to be available for really learning and problem solving. The second category that I want to talk about is executive function, and I've kind of alluded to this a few times. And I don't know, I'm hoping that there's some other resources available to you on MHA for executive function. I'm sure there must be, and I really would encourage you to pursue, if you're not familiar with executive function, it's really a fundamental component to understand learning and how kids' brains work. And there are 6 areas of executive function that were identified by the research of Dr. Thomas E. Brown. This is the work that we use. There's some other frameworks, but this is the one that we find most universally effective and easy for parents and teachers and providers to access. So there's 6 areas of executive function that's the brain's orchestra leader, the part of the brain that reasons and plans and prioritizes and sequences and regulates in all aspects is the executive function of the brain. And this is typically develops more slowly in kids with neurodiversity. And it is typically harder for kids to self-regulate in some, if not all of these areas. Some of them we're familiar with. They may be action like hyperactivity. Some of it is memory. A lot of our kids struggle with all kinds of memory issues. We understand when we think about ADHD, for example, we think about attention, or we think about the action, right? Hyperactivity. But there's so much more involved with what can be going on for these kids. As we've talked about, emotion management in the last slide was really important. Effort management is something that I think is largely misunderstood and under discussed in these realms around neurodiverse kids. The effort that it takes to get up, out of bed, dressed, out the door, and to school on time for some of these kids is extraordinary, that by the time they get to school, they're already spent. They're already exhausted. They've already used half their energy for the day. And we're trying to get them to keep pushing through. And a lot of these kids need a chance to recharge, to catch a breath, to take a pause, to walk out and come back. They need to be able to regulate their energy and their effort differently. And as adults, if we can recognize when a kid's kind of hit their limit and give them that break, pushing through is not likely to yield as much benefit as taking a moment. We now understand, like, I don't know, I have my middle child's in medical school right now, as a kid with ADHD, anxiety, and dyslexia, and works really, really hard. What's interesting is that their whole generation of kids in this class, all of these young medical students, young in their late 20s, all understand the value of rest. They all understand the value of sleep. Part of what they're learning now that we never learned, certainly in our generation, is that pushing through is actually not the healthiest way to learn, but that by down regulating and giving the nervous system a break, that's actually what it makes it more available. So becoming aware of executive function can be really, really powerful. The coaching tip here with kids who struggle with these issues is to play to their strengths, really focus on a strength-based approach. Externalize their challenges, help it be external for them so they don't feel like a bad kid, but they understand, but they're struggling with working memory, getting started, following through, sticking with something, bringing their attention back, whatever it is, help to take it outside of their own sense of self-concept and externalize it to, it is something that they have to learn to deal with. Begin to focus more on smaller incremental steps to solutions. And then whenever possible, catch them up on lagging skills, identify where they may have missed learning something along the way because they were developmentally delayed or they weren't ready to learn it when their kids were, when their class, their peers were exposed to it. So be willing to go back and catch them up. The next one is language and information processing differences. So there's a lot to say here. Processing differences can be visual, they can be auditory, they can be verbal, kinesthetic, pace-related. Some kids process language fast, some process slow. Some do some aspects of language fast and other aspects slow. So really understanding how kids process information, we've moved into a world in the education environment where we understand that classrooms need to be multimodal. We know that some kids read better, some kids listen better, some kids need to see it. And so we have begun to change the way that we provide education to make sure we're meeting all these different modalities. I want to suggest that we can enhance that by helping kids understand what their processing preferences are and beginning to allow them to make choices. I think about when textbooks went all digital a number of years ago, which was great for some kids, but terrible for others. Some kids really need to hold that piece of paper in their hand. They really need the highlighter in their hand. So really beginning to allow them to become directors of their own education by helping us understand how they process can be a really powerful, empowering tool for students. The coaching tip here is to really get curious with them about how they process information and allow for different processing differences. Allow some to take notes on a computer, some by hand. Let them use voice recorders to restate, to pause, take a moment to process, whatever it is they need. Some kids need structured check-ins, some don't. Some kids need to be able to clarify the topic back to you and let you know what they think they understand. Some need help externalizing memory. Some need help remembering the future. So really understanding the way they process information well enough to guide them to understand themselves well enough for them to learn to manage themselves. So there are two more categories. The next one is motivation and intention. When it comes to people with neurodiversity, we don't really recognize enough how fundamental motivation and intention are to achieving outcomes. When it comes to producing, to doing, motivation and intention are essential. I mentioned earlier that our kids very often don't have what we call a just get it done button, or they have it, but if they do have it, it's behind barbed wire. They can't just write something on a list or decide or be told they're going to do it and have all of the components they need in their brain to remember to do it, follow through with it, execute on it, complete it. They need more engagement from the brain, with the brain on that. They need to identify what their motivations are, and they really need to be very clear and intending to do it. If you've ever had a kid in your class who you felt like they only do it if they want to do it, or they only do it because they're interested, or they won't do it because I told them to only if they want to, that's because they're struggling with motivation and intention. And so we really want to help them identify when they intend, what their motivation is and when they intend to do something. The coaching tip here, and I'm going to give you a little trick to play with, is to identify motivators for absolutely every action, large and small, and reward the steps in the process instead of just the outcome. In school environments, we often reward with a test, with the end result. And with our kids, with neurospicy kids, we really want to reward them along the process, give them the props along the way, make the rewards and the benefits shorter, closer, so that they're likely to stay engaged with it. And you also want to anticipate what might interfere with their motivation without judgment, right? So it's recognizing that this may be really hard. Let's anticipate that and come up with a mechanism for managing it without making them feel bad because this is hard for them. I knew you weren't going to do it. Instead, we want to be, this is something that you've struggled with in the past. Can we brainstorm about what might help make it stick for you? What may make you connect to it differently? So I know that a lot of you are looking for tactical advice and guidance. And while I think there's a lot that's in this presentation that's quite tactical, I want to give you this little bonus gift. Because if you take away nothing else from this presentation but this slide and this construct, it will serve you extraordinarily well. There are 5 key motivators that really work for kids with neurodiversity. And if we recognize that they need a motivation to do just about anything and everything, and that they need a motivation to everything from brushing their teeth to reading the book to writing the paper to doing the math problems, whatever it is, if we acknowledge without judgment that, yeah, they need a motivation, that's how their brain works, then we can help them begin to find what motivates them with this acronym PENCH. PENCH stands for, the P is play. And we all are understanding the value of gamification, and we all use play in the classroom. Play, creativity falls into this category. Humor falls into this category. The more that our kids can play through learning, the more engaged some of them are really going to be. The I stands for interest. Yes, these are the kids who are really interested in some subjects and not others. Sometimes they're really interested in some teachers. Like if you've got a teacher who's really engaged and really dramatic, they may find that class way more engaging. But really recognizing that our kids are going to struggle. Some of our kids are really going to struggle if they can't identify what's interesting about it to them. And so helping them figure out what's in it for them can be a real value. Or finding another motivation. So maybe they're motivated by novelty. These are the kids who do really well at the beginning of a school year with new workbooks and new books and new notebooks and new students in the class and new teachers. And then a few months into the classroom, the school year, they're starting to get tired and they're starting to get bored with it. And maybe if you switch next semester, they're doing great, but otherwise by, a certain point in the year, they're starting to be done because it's just too boring. There's not enough change. These are kids who sometimes you worry that they're really not going to be able to make it in the middle school years or the high school years. And then they go to a place where there's more changing of classrooms and they actually do much better. Those are often kids who are motivated by novelty. I'm highly motivated by novelty. So I keep 3 toothpastes in my bathroom drawer. And so that way I have a little toothpaste roulette, and every day I get to decide something new and different, and it kind of keeps me engaged. It's not that I'm not going to brush my teeth, but it makes it a little more fun, and it engages me a little bit more and makes it easier for me to follow through with that. I use a toothbrush that's got one of those 2-minute timers. Again, a structure that helps me do it and helps me be successful. The fourth category is competition. Connection falls into here, collaboration. It's kids who really do well in relation to each other. Sometimes it's competition. We tend to use this in the classroom. We got to be careful not to overuse it because sometimes it stresses out the kids with anxiety, the 1-minute maths and those kinds of things. But competition and connection can be a really powerful tool for some kids. These are older kids who do really well with study groups. They'll do the studying if they've got peers that are doing it with them. We see this in high school when kids fall into a group of kids, a group of peers who are all working, and all of a sudden they start performing better because they've fallen in with a group that's got a value around it. So connection, competition, collaboration are all motivators for some kids. The last category is what we call hurry up or urgency. What's happening here, these are the kids who wait till the last minute to get anything. And what's happening here is that a different part of the brain is clicking in. We're no longer trying to accelerate the frontal lobe that's a little sluggish, but they're actually relying on the amygdala to kick in, which is the primitive part of the brain that's activating. The good news is it's a way to get yourself going and get engaged. The bad news is that it creates a stress cycle. And so there's a value to using urgency or hurry up as a motivator, but we don't want it to be their only motivator because that begins to create a constant stress cycle in the body. And I think part of the adult disease we see is from so many adults whose only motivator, the only way they know how to get themselves to do anything is to wait till the last minute, to set a deadline, to stress themselves out, to beat themselves up, to, like we as adults use this and overuse this as well. So I like to take a stand that hurry up is a legitimate motivator. We just don't want it to be our only one. So if you can take PENCH with you, use it, teach it to your students, it is a really powerful tool to help people understand themselves better and understand how their brains work. And it's every bit as effective for students with neurodiversity as without. The last category, which is where we typically start, is the effective use of systems and structures. So I'm just realizing, did I leave out a coaching tip? But I didn't. Okay. Effective use of systems and structures. We often want to start with a solution. In a school environment, we very often start with a solution. We put a reward chart in place or a star chart for younger kids. There are all kinds of ways where we start by saying, here's how you fix the problem. Very often we do that before we slow down to figure out what the problem is we're really trying to solve. And so where I really want to take a stand here is to suggest that systems and structures, the purpose of a system or a structure is not the goal. The purpose of it is to achieve another goal. And when we're ever putting a system or structure in place, we want to make sure we're clear what the goal is we're really trying to achieve, rather than making the system become the goal. Very often what we see in a classroom environment and school environments, a lot of schools have planners. We give our kids planners. And then we start holding them accountable to using the planner. And well, you didn't write it in a planner, or yeah, you did write it in a planner. The planner isn't the goal. The planner is supposed to help our kids know what their homework assignments are. And if we are rewarding them for using the structure without making sure that that's the right structure for them to use to achieve the goal, then we run the risk of setting them up for failure instead of success. So I'm a big believer in rewarding kids for using systems, but we want to start by making sure that they're part of creating the system and that they understand the purpose of the system. They understand if we're giving a kid a prompt the day before a writing assignment, we want to help them understand that the reason we're doing this is so that they have time to think about it, because it will help reduce their stress when they get to the school the next day and they're asked to write a paragraph. We want them to know that there's a purpose behind the structure and that the structure isn't the dream, that the structure is there to serve a larger purpose. So the coaching tip I want to offer here is that when we create systems, and there are kind of three different kinds of systems. There are reward systems, there are reminder systems, and there are kind of what we call restarters, systems to get us back on track. We want to make sure that whenever we create systems, that they are as simple as we can possibly make them, that they have flexibility built into them, and that they're personalized to the student whenever possible. When we create really complex systems, it can make it much harder for a lot of people to follow them. The simpler the system, the easier it is for people to recognize when they're being successful with it. And we want to give them some wins, because success is going to breed more success. The solutions are always in those successes. So the simpler we can make it, the more likely we're going to help them build on their successes. The other piece I want to mention here is the importance of flexibility. One of the things we learned when the world shut down at the beginning of COVID was how important it was that our systems be able to adapt and move. And those who had flexible systems were able to relocate, remove, shift to a different way of education. Those who had rigidity in the structures really, really had a hard time coping. So it's really important in neurodiversity world that we have systems and structures, that we really need motivation, intention, and systems to be able to achieve anything. But those systems have to have some movement in them. Just like a building needs a little movement, or a bridge needs a little movement, or it's going to collapse. Our systems need to have enough movement so that when someone's having a bad day or something else is happening, that we can be a little adaptive so that the system, again, is not rigid and doesn't become the goal itself. So those are the 5 contexts that I think, I want to just go back for a minute. I'm going to go back to that pyramid. I have to click twice. Sorry about this. One more. So these are the 5 contexts that at a very minimum that are required to understand in more depth in order to be neuro-informed. And my hope is that when you leave here after this conversation, you'll be able to take these constructs and use them to some extent. And my real deep desire is that you will learn this and say, okay, I want to know more. I want to understand emotional regulation better. I want to really explore executive function and understand how I can use that to help my kids take ownership of their education. I want to really pay attention to how they process language and what is motivating them, what's important to them about it. It's not enough to tell them they've got to do it because it's got to be done. They need some help to figure out what's in it for them. And we definitely want to teach them to use systems, and we want to teach them to use structures, and we want to help them learn to put them in place for themselves, because that's when it really works. And when it feels like it's imposed upon them, they have a tendency to feel like they're broken and we're trying to fix them. But when they can see the value of it, when they see that there's something they want to change, they can lean into being part of the creation of it. They can begin to use systems and structures more effectively. So as we begin to move, we're going to move into conversation a little bit. Neuro-informed support is important because it shows up in all aspects of life and education. Our kids thrive with empowerment and with a strength-based approach. They really, really do well. And there's so much research on what happens when they know what they do well, when they see their strengths, and when they can play to their strengths and to some extent outsource their challenges. Right? They don't have to be great at everything. I'll talk about that again in a moment. The best supports for our kids will emphasize not just what they're doing, but also how they're being with it. And in a school environment, we tend to get very focused on performance. And we really need to slow down and pay attention to how they're feeling about it and how they're feeling about themselves, because that's going to make a big difference for their capacity to perform. With training, educators can really much better serve neurodiverse students, but without awareness, we can unintentionally cause harm. And I'm hoping, if nothing else, as you leave here today, that you'll recognize those students, those moments when there's an opportunity to ask. The question we like to ask is it naughty or is it neurological? Is there something else going on with this kid that might need some additional support or understanding? And again, educators can better understand when to refer neurodiverse students for support and to whom they can refer when they better understand neurodiversity. So let's talk for a moment about accommodations. Why do kids get accommodations in a classroom? The purpose of a neuro-informed support, which is what an accommodation is to really meet them where they are developmentally at that moment at their education. And so if a kid is 10 and developmentally, when it comes to organization, they're really more like 7 or 8, then we need to accommodate the environment to make sure we're meeting them where they are developmentally, not just where they are chronologically. So the purpose of accountability in a classroom is for support, not for correction. The purpose of developing plans and that makes sense from their perspective is to really understand what's in it for them, what's important to them, to help them be part of buying into and taking ownership of their education and what they're trying to learn and do. We want to modify our processes in a classroom and all of our follow-up with kids in a way that really empowers their sense of agency. One of my favorite questions to use is, how do you want me to handle it when? When we have an anticipation that a kid may not follow through with something, may not do what they've committed to doing, instead of saying, well, you didn't do that, we want to anticipate it and say, well, okay, so you've committed to this and this. I'm hearing that. How do you want me to handle it when? Would you like me to check in with you? Do you want me to tap you on the shoulder? What would you like me to do? Every time we ask them a question like that, we put them back in the director mode of their own education. And every opportunity for them to feel ownership of their education is an opportunity for them to be more successful. And we want to be willing to catch them up or follow up, to remind them, to support, to externalize memory. We want to be able to help provide the accommodations that they need without any sense of judgment or shame. And we have to recognize, I didn't include it in this presentation, but there are a lot of reasons that our kids don't ask for help. help. The biggest one among them is they don't want to need it. And so when we see them needing help, and then we get frustrated because they won't take the help we're offering or that someone's offering them, we want to recognize that there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on there. And there's shame and there's embarrassment, and they just want to be like their peers. And so we want to pull out of that judgment cycle and avoid the tendency to unintentionally create a shame spiral for them, and really accept that asking for and accepting help can be extremely difficult for these kids. And so instead of expecting it, we want to enroll them in the process and be willing to work with them on it, and to start with the assumption that it's an emotionally difficult thing for them in the first place. So referrals. What are some of the options for referrals to other support and helping professionals when you've got complex kids? So first and foremost is parent interventions. This is recommended treatment for kids with neurodiversity of all kinds. Parent training, parent coaching, parent support groups. In my experience, we've interviewed and surveyed hundreds and hundreds of providers and educators, and we hear all the time that parents and providers are hesitant to make recommendations to parents to get support because they don't want to offend them, because it's uncomfortable. There are a lot of reasons they give. But what happens is, if the number one treatment besides teacher training is parent training, and nobody's telling the parents they need the help, then the parents are looking to the providers for expertise. The parents all make the assumption that every educator knows everything I've talked about today and then some. Parents assume that educators are getting this education as part of their training. And so when educators aren't telling them, well, part of what your kid really needs is for you to learn how to create an accommodation environment at home, if they don't hear that, they're not getting it from anywhere else. So one of the key supports is actually to guide parents towards resources that can support them. In terms of therapy, sometimes our kids may need additional emotional support. Therapeutic support is not recommended for ADHD. It's not going to help a kid organize backpack, but it can help them deal with the emotions around having ADHD or anxiety or depression or autism or whatever it is they have. So therapy, the common therapies are DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. That one's a little bit more resource-based, like tactically based. You know, they'll teach kids to put an ice cube on their wrist to calm down, or it's skill-based. Cognitive behavioral therapy is more talk-based. It's about really beginning to become aware of their thoughts. And then there's play, art, talk, all different kinds of equine therapy. There's occupational therapy, lots of different kinds of therapy that can benefit kids depending on what they're struggling with. In terms of student remediation, there's learning disability support, executive functioning, tutoring, and coaching. The caution here is to make sure the kid is ready. When we put kids in a modality that they're not ready for, that they haven't bought into in some way, what ends up happening is that we're not setting them up for success. Very often it's a failure. And then the kids are moving to a place of saying, see, I told you that's not going to work. And then they've ruled out that modality forever or for a long time. And so we don't want to force a kid to go into tutoring or to go into coaching or whatever, because we want them to be ready to use the modality. And when we introduce a modality, when they're ready to use it, they're going to embrace it differently and own it differently. So what I want to wrap this conversation up with is this notion that words matter. In the neurodiverse world, words create worlds. Neurodiversity advocates encourage inclusive, non-judgmental language because it is empowering, it's positive, it's forward-focused, and it reconnects kids to hope. I interviewed a beautiful provider, a guy named Andreas Kraft, who's a researcher. He's a futurist. He's one of the world's greatest researchers on hope. And I met him in Austria at the Positive Psychology Conference in 2024. And he was a keynoter on hope. And it was such an extraordinary conversation because his summary of the whole thing was how important it was for parents and educators to believe in kids. And so I invited him to my podcast. We had this beautiful conversation. And what he talked about was how important it is for kids to have the adults in their world believe in them and have hope for their future and to see a forward motion for them in their future. And with neurodiverse kids, this is all the more important. There's been so much of the world coming at them that they begin to feel stuck. And what they really need is forward motion and to be able to believe in their own capacity and their own competence. And sometimes they need us to believe it for them until they're ready to believe it for themselves. And I literally will say this to kids. I have certainly said this to mine, is that I believe in you and I know you can do it. And I know you don't see that right now, and that's okay. I'm going to hold that belief for you until you catch up, until you're ready to believe it for yourself, because I see what your potential is and I know you can. But it's okay that you're not so sure yet. And they really need us to hold that part that says, it's okay that you may not get how amazing you are yet. But they need to believe that we actually believe that. And they need our hope for them to see their future. The future of the world is neuro-informed. The future of education is neuro-informed. Our kids are neurodiverse kids. They are specialists in a generalist's world. As educators, if we can help them find their specialty, if we can help them connect with their gift and allow the rest of it to be good enough, and I'm not arguing for letting kids not get an education, but I am saying that if a kid's really gifted in language arts, maybe we don't have them spend all their time trying to get better at math. Maybe we lean into the language arts and we let them be a good enough average student in math and really excel in the places that they love, because they are specialists in a generalist's world. And when we give them permission to really lean into their strengths, that's where they're going to excel. And as they become adults, that's where they're going to begin to create their own accommodated environments by really doing what they do well and learning to outsource the challenges that they struggle with. So I'm going to end this conversation with a traditional wrap-up and a neurodiverse wrap-up. The traditional wrap-up as a coach might be to end this conversation and say to you all, please take a moment to ask yourself, what are you taking away from this conversation today that you will use to improve your coaching, your assessments, your practices, or your life? What are you taking away? The neurodiverse version of that question might be 4 questions. So what did I focus on or pay attention to in this session? Let's break this down. What had your attention? What were you focusing on? What's your clarity or takeaway from this conversation? What's your aha, your insight? And maybe based on that, what's one action step you want to take? And maybe if so, how are you going to set yourself up for success with that action? See how we're breaking this down. What did you notice? What's important? What's your insight? What's your action? What will help you be successful with that action? That would be setting somebody with neurodiversity up for success. So please capture it in the chat. What's your insight from today? What's your clarity? What's your takeaway? We're going to move into Q&A now. But do please
Thank you very much, Elaine.
And then I just want to offer one more thing, Pedro, is that we have some resources. There's several links here. I'll put them in the chat for anybody if you'd like. These are all free and available. Well, they're not all free. Some of them are programs. Some of them are free guides. So I have 2 free guides, Neurodiversity Guide for Educators and a free chapter of the book, The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids, which is for both parents and educators. And then if you're interested in further education, there are a couple of training programs here that you might want to find out more about. And on that, I will now say, yeah,
we're going to include those links in the handout as well. That will be available in the
Great.
event portal shortly, so everybody can take a look there.
Beautiful.
Now, with questions, quickly, I've got a bunch of questions here, but I'm going to start by anchoring back on that question about when students start using the label as an excuse to not
Right.
try or avoid responsibility for overt negative behavior. So do you want to expand more on that?
Yeah, thank you. So the way I responded to that earlier is that when kids are using a neurodiversity as an excuse, it's typically because they don't understand it and because they, for a variety of reasons, feel shame or embarrassment, or it just feels so overwhelming that it feels like a way to manage the intense effort of it. When kids understand what they're dealing with, then, and it becomes an explanation, then we can invite them to be in a conversation about learning to manage it. An excuse is a defense in some way, or maybe it's a defense or an offense, but it's a way to not take responsibility for it because in some way they feel wrong or shame. They think they're permanently incapable. Beautiful, Joan. Great way to put it. When we give them an explanation, wow, that's really hard for you. I can see why that's hard for you. So when my middle kid, who's the med student, was 8 years old, she was diagnosed with dyslexia. And I remember going to her and sitting down and saying, wow, sweetie, we understand the way your brain works now. We can understand why school's been so hard. And she broke into tears and she said, oh, mommy, I've been trying so hard. And she had been, but trying harder wasn't going to change anything. And so if we didn't help and get her accommodations and get her remediation, at some point, she was going to come up with other ways to look like she had it all together because she was trying so hard and it wasn't enough. She needed something different. So an explanation is a way to help a kid take ownership. And it excuses what happens when the people around them or they don't understand it yet.
Thank you very much, Elaine.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions was, what's the most effective testing diagnostic tool? Do you have any comments on that?
I am not the right person to ask that question. I'm sorry. I'm not a diagnostician. I'm a coach. I'm a parenting educator and a teacher educator. There are some standard programs out there. It depends on where you are in the world. It depends on what you're evaluating for. What I will say is that I do believe in making diagnosis a boon, not a bust. I am not back to that conversation about labels. I do really believe that if a kid's struggling with something and you don't give them that explanation, what they make up is a whole lot worse. And so we do want to pursue diagnosis when relevant. And you're going to treat so many of these issues so differently. What we offer is what we call a transdiagnostic approach. The beauty of the neuro-informed coach approach is that it doesn't matter to me whether a kid's diagnosed with dyslexia, anxiety, ADD, autism. The coach approach is going to teach the adult in their life how to meet them where they are and empower them and invite them to learn to understand themselves. The nuance of those diagnoses, which is done by medical providers, and sometimes now there's more and more online resources, is really important for the purpose of understanding what they're dealing with so that they can learn to manage it.
Thank you very much. Next question. What are some subtle signs of neurodivergence in students that teachers often miss, and how can we train ourselves to notice them earlier?
That's a great question. What are subtle signs of neurodiversity? It's so varied what comes up in neurodiversity. I think sometimes shyness, quiet, kids that very often girls get unrecognized and get missed until they're older because they are kind of conditioned to perform, to please. And so very often we see the overt behaviors. We see the disruptive boys. We see the kids that are bouncing off the walls. We see the kids that are hiding or running out of the classroom. But when a kid is, erasing a lot, when a kid is ripping up their paper, there may be an underlying perfectionism that's got a reason behind it. If we recognize that every behavior is telling us something, then we can begin to interpret those behavior differently. The kids that aren't causing trouble are very often kids who are struggling going under the radar. Because the kids who are doing really well, you're going to know, and they're going to know, and they're going to make sure you know. It's the kids who are struggling sometimes are the ones who are quietly just trying, and this kid's really bright, and they're just not turning in their work that seems commensurate with their intelligence, not living up to their expectations. I would expect more, like when you feel that way about a student, that's often a sign that there's something underlying going on. And it could be a neurodiversity. It could be a trauma going on in the household. I mean, there are a lot of things it could be. I'm not saying that everything is neurodiversity. But when we look at kids, that dissonance between performance and behavior, and like, as you get to know a kid, you kind of know what to expect. And if there's something out of sync, that's a pretty good sign that you're recognizing something. And I would say, trust your instincts. There's something going on. And whether it's a diagnostic issue or something else. I mean, I was talking to a client the other day who, this kid had been having problems for a long time. And the teacher, nobody told the teacher that the parents had were in the middle of going through a divorce. And so the kid's struggling all year, and they're doing all these teacher meetings and all this stuff. And nobody told the school that there was something happening at home. So we really have to trust our instincts and then get curious. I mean, the coaching tool that we teach around it is to get curious and openly, non-judgmentally get curious about what's going on with this kid.
Thank you very much.
Yep, saying the same thing over and over again, pen tapping, hiding behind the noisier, perceived brighter kids, all good indications. Yep. Sorry.
All right, the next one is, how can we distinguish between behavioral challenges rooted in neurodiversity and those stemming from other causes like trauma, home environment, or disengagement? That's a difficult question to answer, but have a crack.
Well, what I would say is, we want to get curious about what's underlying the problem. And then, whether we know or not, we want to meet these kids where they are. Because whatever that behavior is a symptom that something's going on. When we can understand, and sometimes we screen for all of these different issues. We screen for learning disabilities. It's very important with kids, especially in the elementary years, but even all the way up, to make sure that we're screening for learning disabilities in addition to, your classic ADHD, autism, anxiety, because very often what looks like anxiety in girls, for example, could be an underlying ADHD that wasn't diagnosed, or a dyslexia that wasn't diagnosed. So we really want to be looking to be curious and understanding how they're processing information in all kinds of ways. And then on some level, again, the transdiagnostic approach is if we take a more coach-like approach with them and we get curious, eventually they're going to tell us what's going on. They know what they're struggling with. We're the ones that don't know. And if they feel like they're wrong for struggling, they're going to hide it from us. If they feel like they're safe with us, they're going to tell us.
Thank you very much, Elaine. In practical terms, how can understanding neurodiversity reshape how we interpret quote-unquote disruptive or quote-unquote non-compliant behavior in the classroom? And you did mention that in the presentation already, but do you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great awareness. So compliance is about following directions. Following directions is not reflective of a sense of agency. So, the joke that I make with parents a lot is that we're really good at fostering a sense of agency and collaborating with our kids in preschool. We're great at it. And we say, do you want the red shirt or the blue shirt? Which do you want to brush your teeth standing up or sitting down? We're really good at helping them get the sense of themselves and beginning to be decision makers for themselves. And then, frankly, we put them in a school system, and the school system shuts the door and says, okay, now sit down, do this, do this, do that. And we begin to rob them of a sense of agency. And so we're kind of expecting two things from them. We want them to take responsibility for their own education, but then we're telling them everything, every step along the way. So I think that one of the tools that I teach is ask, don't tell. The more we can start asking questions of kids, the more we can foster a sense of their agency. And when they've got agency, we're not asking for compliance anymore. We're figuring out how do we support them in their learning instead of asking them to do what we think they should do. When it comes to behavior issues, it gets a little more complicated, but I would argue that often what happens with behavior issues is in a classroom environment, especially with older kids, but really of all ages, you've got a kid who wants to exert some agency and control over their life, and they're in a structured environment that is not allowing any flexibility for them to have a voice, and they're starting to feel shut down, and so they're pushing back. And so if you've got a strong-willed kid, chances are they're asking for agency. And if we can shift from why won't they do what I want them to do, to start enrolling them and helping them find a way to express that agency, you're going to create a lifelong learner way sooner, way quicker, way easier.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Next question is, what's one communication shift teachers can make tomorrow that would significantly improve understanding with a neurodiverse student?
Oh, wow. Great.
Could also be today, could be this afternoon.
Today. That's a fabulous question. The first thing I thought of was ask more questions. Ask, don't tell, what I just said. But I'm going to add one more to it. I'm going to answer two, because ask more questions. If I can beg of you to do anything differently, it's start asking questions you actually might even know the answer to. Because so here's how information and insight works from a psychological perspective. When somebody gives you information, which we teachers give people information, the person receiving the information is going to vote. Do I agree with that or not? Do I like it or not? Right? We live in a world where fake news is a thing, right? Because we're deciding, do we agree with it or not? But if we ask somebody a question and they answer it for themselves, what's important about that to you? Would you like to do this? Are you interested in that? Once they answer it, that answer is their own insight. They're no longer voting on whether they agree with it or not, because it's their insight. So the more we can ask questions, the more we can get kids to internalize. So like when you're trying to get into a conversation that might be difficult, if you can just ask a question like, I'd like to talk to you about something, is that okay with you? Just asking permission, and they say yes, means they're now directing their end of the conversation, and they've got a different buy-in. They're going to receive the information differently. So asking questions is super, super powerful. The other thing I would say is to acknowledge whatever their experience is. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with their experience, but to acknowledge their perspective on whatever is going on. I can see that you're struggling with that. I can see that's hard for you. It sounds like that was really painful. It sounds like you're really frustrated. It doesn't really matter what it is. If they feel seen and heard by you, that will begin to cultivate trust. And if you can start everything with an acknowledgement and try not to follow it with the word but, because but negates everything you just said. So if you can play that improv game and yes and with your students all day long, you will get better results and more engagement.
Thank you very much. How do you suggest teachers explain neurodiversity to neurotypical students in a way that fosters empathy without othering their peers?
Interesting. I would say that we talk about neurodiversity as everybody's brains are wired differently, and everybody's got strengths and everybody's got challenges. The assumption underneath that question is that neurotypical kids are better and neurodiverse kids are flawed. And And if we understand that neurodiversity fundamentally means that everybody's brains are different and everybody's got strengths and everybody's got challenges, we're going to play to the strengths, then we're no longer worrying about othering, because what we're doing is we're normalizing difference instead of normalizing same. And a school environment tends to normalize same.
How much do you think curiosity plays on that one?
Oh,
Getting kids curious about different ways of seeing the world, and there's probably a million analogies that can be used in that context.
yeah. I think curiosity is one of the most powerful tools we adults have. And the better we teach it to our kids, the sooner they begin to learn to use it with each other. I used to say to my own kids, you're all going to get your needs met and you don't need the same thing. And everybody's going to get their needs met, but it's not always going to be the same, because you all are very different people with different needs. And the kids know this intuitively, but we have this tendency as adults to reinforce their desire to be, quote, normal. When we can break that myth that there is a normal, we actually create an environment that lets them all be themselves and will be so much healthier for them as they grow up.
Thank you. What strategies have you seen work well when communicating with parents who are in denial or struggling to accept their child's neurodivergence?
It's a great question. It's hard. I mean, I've done a lot of research around this over the years. I mean, literally, we've done a lot of research on it. Just like kids don't want to ask for or accept help because they don't want to need it. They're afraid they're not going to be successful at it. They're not sure they can trust it. Like, there are all these reasons. Parents are the same. And, at the end of the day, so I don't know why I keep talking about my daughter today. But my kid's in med school and is on rotations and is interested in pediatrics, but is a little worried about the parents. And what I was saying to her the other day was, every parent shows up with a little child inside. And I would say the same for teachers. Every teacher shows up with a child inside who wants to be seen, who wants to be heard, who wants to be acknowledged for what they are doing instead of criticized for what they aren't doing. And the same is true for parents. And if we recognize that a parent's resistance is really not about the kid, it's about the fact that the parent is struggling and afraid or worried or disappointed or scared or whatever it is. If we can compassionately meet them where they are, we can enroll them in what we know they really want, which is what's best for their kid. But if they feel like they've done something wrong, parents carry a lot of shame around having neurodiverse kids. And society reinforces this sense of shame. And like, I interviewed a psychologist from Australia a number of years ago. And the topic was, am I to blame for my kids' ADHD? And parents, when their kids get these issues, especially if they have these issues themselves, and remember, at least half these parents have issues themselves, right? So you're dealing with a kid with ADHD and you're trying to get the parent to do something, and the parent's probably dealing with their own ADD that they've never even identified before. So understand that they're just humans like the kids and like you, and you're all trying to do the best you can. And if we can focus more on where we're in alignment with each other instead of whether or not we agree, we can really make a lot of progress. I mean, our resources at Impact Parents, 90% of what we do is free. It's an amazing resource. We've been doing it since 2011, and I'm not pitching it as I'm not trying to pitch you anything, but if you as an educator can say to parents, I heard about this great resource called Impact Parents, you might try their blog or their podcast. Just that can begin to help them open up, because there is so much shame and stigma that you don't realize is there. It's really not about you, and it's really probably not about the kid. It's about the parent is struggling and they want to do a good job and they don't know how. And there's not a lot of resources for them, right? There's a lot for educators and there's a lot for kids, but there's not a lot for parents. Not a lot that they know that they can trust.
Yeah. Yeah, not a lot that's not TikTok.
Right. Exactly. But if you can say, look, this company's been around for 15 years and started by parents, and it's just for parents, you might want to check it out. That feels safe, right? That doesn't feel like you're broken and I can't stand what you're doing. It feels like I care about you and I can see that you're struggling. And I say this to parents all the time too, by the way, is I'm constantly on, you've got to understand what these teachers are dealing with and how hard this is and how many different layers and how many different kids you've got in the same classroom. And if we can come to teachers as parents and say, thank you, how can we work together as a team? It makes all the difference in the world. And the same is true for teachers and parents.
Thank you, Elaine. Could giving students agency lead to them saying that they'd rather stay home and learn from YouTube than go to school?
It could, but I'm not saying give them the out to what their responsibilities are. I'm saying enroll them in how do they make it work in a way that works for them. I mean, there are some kids who might do better staying home, not maybe learning from YouTube, but, doing online school or whatever, probably more who would do better in a social environment of school. But so when my youngest kid was in high school, his sophomore year was really, really rough. And actually it was really rough all the way up till that point. And he was fighting tooth and nail with having to take chemistry. Why should I have to take chemistry? I'm not interested in it. It's not my thing. I'm not going to do it in my life. We've all heard this story. And we spent almost all of 10th grade in conversation with him, helping him see the value to him. Ultimately, the value to him was he wanted to go to college. And he figured out that once he got to college, he was going to get to take classes that were interesting to him and do what he wanted to do and not have to fulfill everybody else's curriculum. And that influenced his college decision, where he went and what kind of school he wanted to go to. But being in a conversation with him around what was important to him about his education kept us out of this battle of you've got to do this, because he wasn't going to do it because I told him to. He had to see what was in it for him. He had to see the value for him because it's his education. And at the end of the day, you cannot force somebody to learn something. It's their education. And what we really want to do is enroll them in their education, not force them to comply with it, right?
Thank you very much, Elaine. This quick question is about whether you know any good in-person EF coaches for teenagers in Brisbane in Australia. That one's a very specific one, but if you happen to know someone.
Well, I've spoken in Brisbane. I don't off the top of my head. But I.
Do you know a resource where people could search for them?
I'm trying to think about that. That's what I was just thinking myself. I don't actually know. So here's what I will say. Okay. When parents come to me and say, my kid needs a coach, my question is always, is your kid asking for help? And if the answer is no, then chances are the focus needs to be on the parent or the teacher, not on the kid. And that when you're ready, when a kid is really asking for help and wants executive function support, they may or may not need it in person. I'm sure there are executive function coaches in Brisbane. But they may not need it in person. They might be able to do it virtually, depending on the age. I'm not sure I would do executive function support for kids much younger than teens or preteens. But we want to make sure we're solving the right problem. And very often the problem is actually not that the kid needs executive function support. It's that the adults need to understand and help the kid understand so that we can begin to catch them up. And then the executive function support is going to click. It's going to stick. I'll think about it. You're welcome to email me or email the team at impactparents.com and we will see. We have a great Facebook group that we can go to, the Hive Mind, and find out who's using what where, because we have people all over the world there. I'm happy to see if we can find some resources there. I'm sure we have them. The therapist, the psychologist who brought me to Australia many years ago is still practicing there. And so I'm sure that Tim would be able to help me find somebody.
Thank you, Elaine. If you had to create a minimum effective dose of classroom adjustments that benefit most neurodiverse students, what would be your top 3?
Ooh, great question. Minimum dose, 3 things you could do in a classroom. Wow. Gosh, that's such a good question. There's so many answers to that question. So much of my work is around adult mindset. So I'm not sure it would be a structural change, although the first thing that comes to mind is somehow asking kids to be part of structure, letting them like have a role in when they do what in the day, not individually, but as a group, like giving them some voice. Like I'm a big fan of creating classroom rules that the kids are the ones that identify, or like giving them some sense of ownership in the class and how the classroom works. That would be one thing I would say. And I don't mean, class presidents and all that. I mean, like really involving them. We so often think we have to know what we need to know before we get in there. And the truth is, if we get curious with them, they're going to tell us what they really need. So I think that would be the second thing is to make curiosity a structure of the classroom. And the language I might use about that would be make it okay to make mistakes. Like create a classroom environment where the learning that comes from making mistakes acknowledges that mistakes are part of learning and like celebrate, acknowledge them, reward them for making mistakes, because that's what you have to do to learn. And really debunking this notion of perfection and really allowing them to learn to become comfortable with learning from mistakes instead of avoiding mistakes. And I think curiosity ties into that somewhere. So that's, I'm sure as soon as we get off this session, I'm going to come up with so many things I wish I had said. One of the books we have is called Parenting ADHD Now, and there's an entire chapter in the book with teacher strategies. And there's a lot of teacher strategies, and of course we have Sanity School for Teachers, but that's what I got for now on that. Great question though. Thank you. Love that.
That's good. And the co-design aspect that you mentioned as well, there's quite a bit of evidence within the context of mental health, how, when doing programs for youth, how co-design plays a very big role in effectiveness. One perfect example of that is the suicide prevention suicide prevention initiative by Origin here in Australia called Chat Safe, which I think they had some absurd number of youth involved, like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands around the world, might even be in the millions, where they all provided input to constantly develop and evolve the program. The program has been around for about 8 years, I think. But anyway, moving on to our next question: how can teachers balance the need for routine and structure with the flexibility required to support neurodiverse learners? So it's kind of a piggyback of the last question, in a way.
Well, when we developed, so I'm going to take a personal approach to this. When we started teaching, what the program for parents is called Sanity School. When we started teaching it to parents, a group of parents who were also teachers came to us and they said, can we help you bring this to teachers? This is transforming our classrooms. And so we created Sanity School for Teachers because teachers were realizing what a difference it made when they began to bring a coach approach to their classroom. And I think the reason it works is because the coach approach is such an empowerment-based approach. And so when we enroll kids in feeling like this is their education and that they have a say and a voice and that this is something they're doing for themselves, it changes everything. And so the changes in the classroom have to do with helping kids see what's in it for them. And I don't care what age you're in, right? What's in it for them? What's the value to them? How do you want this to go? I mean, I'm remembering this one teacher who had this one kid who was really struggling in the classroom all the time. And she had the whole classroom doing something, and this one kid was just really not able to do work that day. And so she finally got everybody else going, and then she went over to the student or asked the student to come to her desk. And it turned out the kid was afraid to go to the dentist and was going to the dentist that day. And that's what was really going on. And this kid had been disruptive, and when she stopped worrying about getting the kid to do the thing and started figuring out what was going on with the kid, it changed the whole tenor of the classroom for the whole rest of the day, because she recognized that kid was not available for what they were doing. And she had to find a different way to be with that kid that day, because the kid was freaked out about the dentist after school, right? So I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but I think that when we stopped directing and we start collaborating, even as teachers, we can take a collaborative approach that involves them in their education. We can enroll them and set them up for success and create an environment of learning that's really extraordinary.
Thank you very much, Elaine. What role does sensory regulation play in neurodivergent student behavior, and what are some low-effort, high-impact accommodations that help?
Oh my goodness, that's a giant question. I was just interviewing a doctor of occupational therapy on my podcast today about this issue, but she was a little bit more focused on the brain, but the whole first part of it was about this. A lot of our kids with neurodiversity, they're either seeking or avoiding, right? They're either needing stimulation, input, pressure, or they're overstimulated. And so we just have to kind of assume that there's a sensory piece that's going on with most people, and really begin to recognize that that's legit. Like when a kid is overstimulated, then they may need to do something to downregulate. When a kid is like feeling like they're losing their mind, they're jumping out of their own skin, they may need to get up. I mean, one of my kids had an accommodation in third grade where they were allowed to stand in the back of the classroom. Just stand, not at their desk, just stand, because they could not sit still all day and they needed to move. And so when we understand that those needs, those seeking or avoiding behaviors are real, then we can meet them without feeling like it has anything to do with us. One of the things I haven't talked about, Pedro, that I think is so important, the language we used to use for it is quit taking the bait. Is we have to stop realizing that other people's behaviors aren't about us. They're about them. And when people have a behavior, if we can kind of take ourselves out of it, we have a tendency to be defensive and to make it be about us because I want my classroom to behave in a certain way. Well, if we realize that they're all having their own experience and it's got very little to do with us, then we can meet them where they are and not really worry about whether it's a reflection of us. And when we do meet them where they are, they will reflect beautifully upon us. That's the irony of it all.
You've just described a few of my interactions with my 5-year-old in great detail.
Yeah, I think it's time to get sanity school.
You do not respect me, you little...
So we say to teachers, quit taking the bait. We say to parents, Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. It's not about you. It's just not.
That's a good point. That's a good point to keep in mind. This is a good follow-up question. So what boundaries should teachers be aware of when supporting neurodivergent students, especially to avoid over-functioning or stepping outside of their scope?
I'm not sure what over-functioning is. I'm not sure how to answer the question. Can you read it again?
Well, let's focus on the stepping outside of their scope. So in terms of boundaries, obviously teachers are watching this right now and they're being maybe doing some other learnings around this area, but it comes a point that maybe it's why you mentioned that it's time for referral or to discuss it with other professionals. So I guess what is a good rule of thumb for teachers to know when they may have overstepped their mark and they're not trying to do too much for one student, for example?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer for it. I think it's individual. I think you've got to trust your instinct. We tell this to parents all the time, and I tell this to teachers all the time. Like, if we slow down and we pause and we pay attention, and I think if we make sure that we're responding and not reacting. So I do a lot of presentations about this distinction between responding and reacting, because when we react, we're in this cycle that's not a healthy react. We're trying to prove something or do something or cover something or be seen as something. When we're responding, we're able to be for them. When we're reacting, it's really more about us. And so I would say probably in those dynamics, it's about what's the real issue here? Is the real issue that I'm really worried about this kid, or is the real issue that I want my student to be successful, or I don't want it to be happening on my watch, or I don't want a parent to talk to me that way? Or, I mean, sometimes there are going to be kids that you desperately want to help that you may not be able to help as much as you want. That's just the reality of it. But what the research does show about resilience is that all kids need is one adult in their life who really believes in them, truly believes in them, to set them up for a life of capacity and resilience. And you can be that one person to any kid, whether you've got parent engagement or not, whether you've got other resources involved or not. What that kid needs from you more than anything is the knowledge that you believe in their capacity. And if you're over-functioning, the message they're going to get is that you don't believe in their competence, that you feel like you have to do it for them. So there's something here about wanting for them and recognizing when what you're wanting is really for them and not avoiding something for yourself. And it's human to not want to have a failed student, and it's human to want the parent to respect you, and like no aspersions on it. That's real. And if you're not sure and you get quiet with yourself, ask yourself, are you being more reactive or responsive to the situation?
Thank you, Elaine. The next question is about advocacy. So how can educators advocate for students, neurodiverse students' needs when their school leadership or colleagues are resistant or dismissive, or sometimes can just be even uninformed or with good intentions, but not necessarily the right approach? Yeah.
There are two things that come up to that question. One is, and I'm going to forgive me for the language if this is offensive to anybody, but if you're not pissing some people off, you're probably not taking a stand. So if you have a strong belief, if you have a conviction, if you know, and you're deep in your heart that what you're doing is important and that it matters, you're going to make some people mad. And that may be okay. Believe me, I'm really good at what I do, and I make people mad all the time. Sometimes they come back and say thank you later, and sometimes they don't. So you gotta lead from your heart and go with conviction and do what you know is important. And it's hard to be an early adopter. I mean, as someone who's been doing this long before anybody ever heard this word, it's very hard to be ahead of the curve, knowing something and seeing something so clearly and feeling like you're dragging everybody else to what is so obvious to you. It is not easy. So I think what I would say is find your allies, make sure you have people you're talking to, find community, connect with each other, connect with us, connect with MHA. Don't do this alone, because it's not easy. And there's power in connection and in numbers, right? Really, because this is important. But we're at the beginning. the research shows that it takes about 17 years for research to make it into practice. And that's in the medical world. It probably takes longer than that in the education world. So we understand this now. We know this now. We have research on it. But it's going to be 20 years before this is standard practice. So those of us who are trying to accelerate that right now, and that's what this conversation is about. We're all here because we're trying to accelerate that. I don't want to wait 20 years for every student in the world to be treated with respect because they have neurodiversity. That's not acceptable to me. And we're ahead of the curve. And so that's going to come with some challenges to it. So do it in community and connect with other people, and don't do it alone.
I mean, as a follow-up to that question, what would you say is one mindset shift that a school leadership team needs to make to begin truly embedding neurodiversity into school culture?
What's one mindset shift that school leadership could take to embed neuro-awareness into the culture?
Yeah, neurodiversity, neuro-awareness into the school culture.
Ask the question.
I guess that would be based on the, it's individual per school, but it would be based on most what you've seen on most schools. What was the one thing that was missing that created that shift? Is
it naughty or neurological? Is that tendency to see behavior as rude, disrespectful, inappropriate, like to judge behavior instead of recognizing that behavior is a symptom that something else is going on, and we're the adults here, we can figure out what that is. Right? But if we are trying to stop their behavior because it doesn't fit into our nice, neat little paradigm, that's about us, not about them. The world is changing, and it's not easy for us, and it's not easy for these kids. And for us to recognize how hard it is for them to be in this world right now and to be trying to go to school with all of this technology and all of this distraction and all of this animosity. And like, the world that we're raising kids in is not the world we were raised in. Even if for those of you who are younger parents right now, there's this huge paradigm shift in the world we're in. And we've got to figure out how to meet them where they are and support them, because there is an emotional need underneath every academic need or every academic capacity. If we really want to help them become educated, if we want them to become critical thinkers, and that's really what I think we want, then we have to respect and acknowledge that the world we're in doesn't make a lot of sense to them as we're trying to guide them towards critical thinking. And so we've got to acknowledge that with some compassion and be willing as the adults to be able to say, yeah, you're right, it doesn't make sense. Or yeah, you're right, that's crazy. Or we're asking two different things of you. Like, the contradictions are so evident to them. This generation of kids is not confident that the world's going to be here when they're adults. They really aren't. They are struggling to find hope. And we're pretending that it's not a problem for them. And they're kind of smarter than we are that way. So it's a bit of a soapbox, and I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
It's a different world, and we've got to acknowledge that, and we've got to meet them in the world they're in, not the world we want them to be in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy to put everything aside. There's things that are more difficult. There's things that are better nowadays. But if you just look at the level of complexity, right, that's something that is very easy to forget. That when we grew up, including you and including myself, even though we might be in slightly different generations.
Slightly. That's very generous of you.
I look younger than I am. But the level of complexity, it's very subtle. It's not something that we can really see because we are taking in that complexity as adults already. We have way more capability to manage that.
That's right.
When you're a kid, when things are complex like that, it's probably too much. It's a little bit too much. So remembering that is very easy.
I have a 24-year-old son, and he said to me about a year ago, and I will never lose these words. He said, "Mom, there is not a kid my generation who hasn't been traumatized by the internet. And there's not a kid out there now who's not going to come across something they don't want to see." no matter how many protections we put in place, no matter how hard we try to protect them. There's not a kid out there who's not going to come across something they wish they hadn't seen. That is the world we're in. And we've just got to be real about that. You know, it's because it's, and I'm not saying we hide under a rock, and I'm not saying we just have to be real that we don't really understand what it is like for them to have the world in their pocket and at their fingertips, right? And to not know who to trust as a resource or a news source, including their own parents, because there is no centralized kind of guidance and authority anymore. Everything is so bifurcated. They don't know what to do. So we have to be patient with that,
Thank you. In a system that's already stretched, what's your advice for managing teacher burnout while still offering meaningful support to neurodiverse students?
Say the first part about it, because I was reading the question about the book. And
in a system that's already stretched, what's your advice for managing teacher burnout while still offering meaningful support to the neurodiverse students? That is the question of the century. How do we help teachers navigate?
Look, I have an answer. The answer is the coach approach, is get teachers training and coaching in, and get teachers coaching. There is coaching as a modality is so empowering and lifts the energy and lifts the weight. And when teachers are taught a coach approach, when teachers get access to coaching, I have a colleague in Switzerland or Austria who has a whole online program bringing coaching to teachers. Like, when teachers get coaching, not therapy, coaching, and I'm not dissing therapy, but in this context, coaching can help you figure out your path forward in whatever it is to get from A to B. Coaching is about, here's where you are, where do you want to go, how do you want to get there? What do you need to consider in the process? What do you need to understand about yourself to make that happen? And so it's a modality that we can make available pretty inexpensively and effectively, and teach coaching skills, because we teach teachers teaching skills, but we don't teach them coaching skills. And they are different modalities. And I think if teachers got more coaching and more access to coaching, it would lighten the weight, and it would improve the communication, and it would reduce the defensiveness that happens between teachers and parents, which is just so unnecessary, right? But I see it all the time. And it would really create a collaborative environment. I'm working with a colleague, and I'm hoping, we haven't gotten it yet. What I really want is to get an entire school system where we've got all the parents and all the teachers in a grade or a school system, all taking the same curriculum. Because I think what you're going to see is it will create a different community culture. And it will be a culture based on collaboration and working together. And it'll eliminate so much of the adversity that shows up when people are just, the adversity comes from not knowing what else to do, right? So that's my answer is coaching is the path forward, and that it is a method for change management that is empowering, that's forward thinking, and that is incredibly effective in creating community.
Thank you. One final question. Can you share an example of a common, well-intended teaching strategy that can backfire for neurodivergent students, and how it could be improved?
The one that jumps at me at the top of my head is the timers, things that, let's see how quick you can do something. Kids who struggle with anxiety, kids who struggle with slow processing speed, a timer is like a timer, and forcing kids who have dyslexia or undiagnosed learning disabilities to read in front of the classroom or to read in front of other people. Those are the two things that can reinforce shame faster. Like, there's a story of somebody I knew, a colleague now, who when he was a kid was asked to read in the classroom, went into the bathroom and broke his glasses because he was so terrified of having to read. So like really paying attention to when the behaviors are something that will work for some but not for all, and making sure we give those kids another way to express their capacity.
Would you recommend talking to kids at the beginning of the semester perhaps, and trying to get a bit of a profile on like common activities you do in the classroom? So it could be like reading in public, or it could be, and then sort of going, any of these things you are, you have really serious problem with, because you also have to, manage you want to push them out of their comfort zone a bit,
Yep.
but you don't want to go too far. So having some way to do a short interview where they can put their preference, or even just giving them something to take away where they can complete. Yeah, survey.
I think that's a great idea. Do a survey. It's like, how many kids like this? How many kids like that? Like however you want to do it. And you're right. You do want to stretch your kids, but you want to do it from a place of compassion and recognition, that's inviting them to try it instead of forcing them to deal with the shame of it. I mean, it's a great idea. I'm sure there are a lot of ways, and it feels daunting, but the better you get to know your class at the beginning of the year, the easier it is to make all these accommodations, because it feels like you're trying to individualize to each one, but your students, right? And if you get to spend a little bit of time front loading at the beginning, really understanding how they work, what they like, what they're working towards, what's important to them. Like, you're going to have some kids that are going to phone it in, but most of the kids are going to feel recognized and seen, because most kids actually do want to do well, and they want to get an education. They just want to be respected as autonomous human beings and not treated as automatons, right?
Fantastic. Elaine, this has been an amazing session. Really appreciate you and your time. I'm already looking forward for our next one in a couple of months. Whatever that is. I think it's on the ADHD, that one. But any final words for people that are live with us right now, or those watching this on demand later on?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for doing this, for inviting me, for really lovely, engaging questions. I really appreciate that. I think the final words that I want to say to everybody is, it's not a clear path forward, right? It's one incremental step at a time. Tiny little nuanced changes can make an extraordinary difference over the course of a school year. So look for the little changes, ask for the help you need, seek support, get guidance, support each other, and give yourself permission to make little changes, and know that that's where the big change happens. It's in tiny little micro steps.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and looking forward to connecting us last time. For those that are live with us, check the event portal for a copy of the slides and also the session notes with a bunch of links, including to Elaine's websites, podcast, and more. Thank you once again for everybody who attended and watching this. Elaine, have a great rest of the evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.